And good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, Leader as Communicator, the challenge of leadership communication during career transitions. I'm Dominic Marnie. I'm here with my colleague Louise Oliver, and as well as what you can see in terms of an introduction about my background. My kind of interest in this field in particular is working with leaders transitioning at various stages of their careers, whether it's within their existing company or indeed coming into a new company, taking over a new executive team and needing to help that team to perform to its best of its ability. So I've got a real interest in working with leaders in that way. This session, which is due to last for 45 minutes, is really a build on our original session of the same title at our recent Communicator conference. I know one or two people on the webinar were at that conference. For those who we're looking to build on that session, and I'm delighted to have Louise to help me with that. As a communications professional, she's going to add to that. And for those who weren't there, hopefully we'll give you a really good flavour of that session over the next 45 minutes. And do please pose questions as we go along. We'll keep a track of them, and we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. Louise.
Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be speaking to you all this afternoon. Yes, I am a senior comms consultant at Communicator. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Communicator shortly, but a little bit about me beyond what you've probably already seen on the screen. I've been with Lane 4 Group for about the last 4 years. And prior to that, I worked across all of the sort of disciplines of corporate communications over the last 14 years, and now sort of moving to specialise really in working with communications professionals and leaders, and I'm going to be sharing some of my previous experiences doing that role and trying to influence leaders to communicate in a really impactful way, and also some of my more recent experiences sort of helping communications professionals to really act as that strategic advisor, coach and counsel. So a little bit about Communicator. Those of you who came along to our conference a couple of weeks ago will know that we're Lane 4's internal communications and engagement practice. We launched this new brand about 2 years ago now, and we work with organisations in 3 key areas. So partnering with them on developing their internal comms strategy. That could be anything from creating high-performing internal comms teams, auditing and doing sort of strategic reviews to understand where an organisation is and how internal comms needs to play a part in driving performance. Secondly, we work in the area of change, so that could be big strategic change programs like a merger or a restructure, a launch of a new vision and values, or it could just be a significant program, maybe a development program, which is something that we do in the space within Lane 4. So we work on those sorts of campaigns. And then finally, skills development. So a bit of what we're going to be sharing with you today is some of the insight from our Leader as Communicator skills development, but we also do skill development with managers, with internal comms professionals in areas such as business partnering, influencing, how to successfully deliver change communication. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel for the type of work that we do, and I guess everything that we're doing is really trying to draw on the heritage and the experience that we have within Lane 4 of that deep sort of psychological insight we have into people and what moves people to action. So I'll hand over to Dominic now just to get into the content.
Thanks, Louise. So our starting point in exploring this subject is this quote from Tom Peters. Because as communications professionals, all of those of us working with leaders in organisations in one form or another, we know which leaders we would encourage to communicate around the business, and those that we would fear with trepidation and letting them loose in our organisation. Those leaders who, when they walk into a room, so kind of switch the lights on, and those who are in danger of switching the lights off. a chairman of a company that I'm currently working with said at a conference to the congregated leaders recently, if you think it's someone else's job to communicate, then you've just chosen not to be a leader. So as comms professionals, we know it's our job to help leaders to communicate as well as they can, and of course to be role models, to role model good communication ourselves. And so as a way into this subject, what we think we need to do is first of all is kind of to appreciate the different kind of contexts and environments in which leaders are expected to communicate in organisations, wherever they are in their career. And this framework, which is the work of our colleague at Lane 4, Chris Rogers, helps to kind of just to analyse the kind of environments in which we're expecting leaders to communicate. On these two axes, first of all, the vertical axis between sort of structured environments which are contained and planned, and unstructured environments which are very spontaneous and emergent. And then on the horizontal axis, formal communication, which is around passing messages, well-crafted messages, passing messages on, and the informal, which is much more around understanding, getting feedback, and making sense of what's happening in an organisation. So kind of structured and formal environments that leaders are expected to be able to communicate well in a kind of conventional forums and meetings, be they team meetings or town hall kind of environments. Those would be kind of structured and formal. Less formal but still structured would be the sort of project teams and workshops that we find ourselves in as leaders, working with others to get things done in organisations. The informal side and unstructured, well, these are the water cooler conversations that we experience, the car park conversations, bumping into people, making sense of what's going on in everyday informal ways. And then finally, and possibly kind of emphasised or recognised by many leaders, actually a formal role that we have in terms of how we walk about the business, how we walk into a room, how we walk out of a room, what we are seen to do and seen not to do. Role modelling and communicating through our role modelling. And if I think about my career, if I go back to being a young soldier, I spent a lot of time in C1 conventional forums and processes on the receiving end. So I was receiving a lot of information by authority figures who were passing messages to me. And then I would go out of those forums and message passing moments, and I would be in C3, and I would be communicating with my colleagues, and we'd be kind of gossiping and chatting, and we'd make kind of banter-like jokes about feeling like mushrooms, sort of kept in the dark and fed rubbish. This kind of banter sort of stuff that we would have, the high-ups communicating to us from C1. And then as my career developed, obviously I'd be spending times in C2 in workshops, working with colleagues, needing to influence and bring people with me. And now I'm conscious as a leader within Lane 4 about actually everything that I do is in some way interpreted and role modelling in C4 how I communicate as I walk around the business. Louise, you've also got experience as a communicator in kind of working with leaders in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. We find when we use this model, typically with leaders, it's really interesting to get them to have a look at this and think about where their preferences are across these areas, and also where they're spending the majority of their time. And I sort of think back to when I was doing my role in-house and how useful this might have been at that time when I was working with the new chief executive at the time. American guy, very sort of gregarious, outgoing, a bit of a showman who clearly really enjoyed spending his time in C1. and that was certainly where he was most comfortable. And I had to try and convince him that it was worthwhile to start thinking about what he was doing in the sort of everyday conversations and the role modelling. And it took me quite a long time to do that, actually, because I don't think he necessarily saw the value or the impact that he was having in that area. So I sort of think about the role that I had to start to play as trying to be sort of a trusted counsel, I guess, and coach. But before I was able to do that, I had to think about how I could influence him by building my own personal credibility, showing him that I understood the business, and that I could actually be helpful as his eyes and ears. And eventually I did that by sort of providing him everything that he needed to look really great in C1 and C2, where he was really comfortable, but also saying to him, how about you think about the impact of when you come into the office and, you know, the way that you talk to people and how open you are. And I eventually got to the point of having weekly meetings with him so I could set his communications agenda, but it took me a long time to move him to that space. So yeah, certainly this model sort of reflects, I think, that transition we made.
Great, thanks, Louise. So a starting point is kind of what are the contexts, the environments in which leaders are expected to communicate, and then to kind of move on, based on the research work that we did the end of last year and into this year around key career stages and inherent shifts in capability that come with these career transitions that leaders experience. What we identified were four key career stages, and then three key career transitions. So the transitions from being an individual contributor to leading a team, from leading a team to being a leader of a group of executives who are themselves leading teams, and then moving on to being a senior executive and being identified as a strategic leader, taking the business of taking the business forward in some way, in some new direction. So these sort of four career stages with three inherent career transitions, and then a number of capability transitions that are expected of a leader as they go through their career. So from being very much an individual contributor to achieving through others, growing performance and development through others, from being a kind of specialist, an expert in your area, to integrating expertise from other areas to build across effective networks, from influencing oneself, first of all directing oneself and maybe a small team, or supervising a team and leading a team, to being much more of a diplomat, being able to navigate the organisation and understand the politics of an organisation and how things really get done. And then moving from focus on the tactical, the here and now, getting things done today, to much more of a strategic view around focusing on the big picture trends and where the organisation needs to go in the future. So as well as these career stages, we need to appreciate these sort of capability transitions that leaders need to go through. Of course, today our focus is on the communications aspects in particular. So with that in mind, we pose these questions around communication challenges and examples of leaders in a survey we conducted, Louise.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, we wanted to bring this to life a little further, and we also wanted to make sure that it was relevant to yourselves on the course. So we've surveyed you and a number of other sort of leaders and comms professionals to gain a bit of an insight. And we focused on these questions, as Dominic has said. So, yes, we asked you which of the communications challenges are most significant when leaders are going through these transitions. So just to briefly sort of run through these, connecting emotionally with people beyond the transactional information, dealing with the unknowns. Leaders often find it challenging to actually say, I don't know, without appearing evasive. This is a good one. Owning the messages that they don't necessarily agree with, so sort of towing the management line. this one around moving from concrete information, again having that sense of certainty to then interpreting what the trends might mean specifically to different areas of an organisation. We've talked about this one a little bit already, about having an impact with these large audiences, having the gravitas on your feet. And tuning into what Dominic described as these sort of water cooler or car park conversations, these informal opportunities to have an impact. And finally, this piece around being too polished and maybe then people thinking that you don't seem as authentic in what you're communicating. So, the findings. We're just going to focus on the top 3, I think. And we weren't actually that surprised by these. So you'll see that 21% suggested that actually this whole idea of connecting emotionally with people, moving beyond the transactional, information sharing, how do you really actively engage? And this is something we're working with our clients on every day. In fact, I've got a nice example of one of our biggest clients, Severn Trent Water, who've recently got a new chief executive, Liv Garfield, who you may be aware that she's recently just won an award for one of the top leaders under 40. And one of the things we're aware that she's been doing is actually just trying to really get more of those opportunities to get face-to-face, get in front of their massive workforce. And apparently, since she joined in spring, she's already managed to sort of have face-to-face contact with 3,500 in various different town hall and sort of informal settings. So a nice example there. Then the second one around, this dealing with the unknowns without appearing evasive is the second highest area. Finally, owning the messages. Again, a really common one that people find quite challenging to not just say the business, but accepting responsibility. We have made this decision because we are moving in this direction because, and making sense of it.
Yeah, it was nice reinforcement. I think probably maybe what we might have identified ourselves, Louise. I mean, for me, the second one, it was a reinforcement of an experience I had quite a few years ago now, but working with the operating board and the top 100 leaders of Safeway, the supermarket chain, as they were being acquired by Morrison's, going through the competition commission uncertainty for about 9 months, and yet being measured on a week by week basis on like for like sales as they do in retail, and the operations board team, their way of handling themselves, I think, was really interesting, because they gathered together leaders as often as they could, simply to tell them what they knew and what they didn't know, and how they felt about things, and that kind of level of straight talking, and I guess also sharing of that uncertainty, because no one knew whether or not they were going to have a job at the end of it or how it's going to work out, was a key part in sustaining morale. And indeed performance during an uncertain period. So I think that one was a nice one around kind of responding to questions that they can't actually answer without appearing evasive, and I think they did that as honestly as they could. The other one that I wanted to pick out was actually the last one about being too polished and therefore lacking authenticity and appearing insincere. I've recently had an experience of a leader who has derailed on this. Was definitely in the running to be the next chief executive, but actually was seen as being a person who could switch it on for those town hall moments and really give a fantastically charismatic and polished performance, and yet in the other areas of the communication grid they weren't quite sure that his actions matched his words, and they weren't quite sure that he is almost too polished in those environments, and it caused a derailment of that leader. So I think it's quite an interesting one to have picked out, and it was certainly someone talked about it at the Communicator conference recently as well.
And I suppose to build on that, one of the things that when we demonstrated the leadership communication grid is if the role modelling, the sort of everything you say and do doesn't match with what you're saying on sort of centre stage, then trust is massively eroded. So I suppose that's just an interesting build on that point. Yeah. So then moving on to your examples of well-known leaders who've either derailed or enhanced. This is what you thought. I think Dominic's going to talk about some of the enhanced.
Well, yes, I thought okay on the enhanced. I think there's some ones that I think we'd recognise, wouldn't we? Some well-known names there. The impact that Barack Obama had through his incredible oratory, his ability to communicate during his election and indeed re-election campaign. The one that sort of I thought was really nice I picked out is Joanna Lumley, and I don't know whether I didn't see too much script around why someone had identified her, but my recollection is a couple of years ago she became quite high profile in fighting for rights for Gurkha soldiers who'd served with the British Army and yet weren't getting a pension here in the UK, and she really did use her full acting repertoire, her ability to communicate with people, and put some politicians into some very tight corners. She really had them by the short and curlies, not only through the clarity of what she was saying and the focus she brought to the subject, but also a combination of her charisma using charm as well as well-reasoned argument, and had a tremendous impact. So, I mean, I don't know whether that's the reason why someone picked them out, but for me, I when I saw that, I really felt, yes, this is somebody who really enhanced her standing as a leader of a cause through her ability to really communicate strongly, yeah.
And then looking at the derailed ones, again, some of the usual suspects in there, so Tony Hayward of BP and his sort of quest to get his life back, which didn't go down too well, and also Gerald Ratner, and I was reading up about the Ratner effect of destroying your business in sort of 10 seconds. So obvious ones there. I thought Nick Clegg was an interesting one because I think initially, arguably, he was enhancing his career, I guess, with the impact of getting into the coalition, and I guess with the specific example of this flagship policy that he had around tuition fees, and then we all know the bad press and the reaction he got from breaking that promise, and then the subsequent apology in 2012, which was parodied and made a bit of a mockery, and no one takes him particularly seriously now. And then looking at other politicians like Boris Johnson, and Dominic and I were having a bit of a debate about him possibly sitting in the middle somewhere, but a bit Marmite.
Yes, I heard a photographer talking about Boris Johnson yesterday, saying they absolutely loved him because so many politicians now are so polished. They don't want to be photographed. They look very carefully around the environment there. But Boris just throws himself in there and somehow manages, gives them both a good photograph and doesn't worry too much about his image, and it sort of comes across like that in the way he communicates as well. He's had some real horrendous moments, like when he managed to offend the whole of Liverpool and had to go up and apologise when he was a junior minister, and then other opportunities where he's really hit the spot with his humour and his ability to connect with people. So yeah, I could see why he would be on that kind of borderline there. One which isn't there, which quite a high-profile person that I was thinking about around the time of the Olympic Games was the boss of G4S, a guy called Nick Buckles, who sort of had a mea culpa moment. I don't really know. I mean, it'd be interested to kind of know how else he could have handled himself, but really sort of came across as somebody who did not know what he was doing in terms of running his organisation, and it was not a great moment for him nor his firm as a result. Good. So this was a kind of chance for us to look at those who've enhanced, those maybe who've derailed. And the next and there's a nice comment from Pauline around, I think those are relating to the comments I made about Joanne alumni. I think I managed to hit the right reasons there. Thank you, Pauline. In terms of thinking about enhancing and particularly derailing, this next kind of slide helps us, again, relating it back to the work we've done around key transitions that leaders need to be able to make in their careers, and the capability, those 4 capabilities that I talked about when I showed you those those transitions. So the capability on the right-hand side, at the centre of that is some identity shifts that leaders have to be able to make. So it's one thing being one of the team, an individual contributor within the team. It's quite another being then a leader of a team and making that identity shift from being one of the crowd to being, actually, no, I am the person who's responsible here. That is an identity shift that we have to be able to make. And that shift is dependent on both the capabilities, but also this idea of adaptability over the left-hand side. And in preventing derailing in leaders, there is an important correlation between their ability to adapt, their learning mindset, how hungry they are to learn, to step up to the plate, to take challenges on, to try things out, to get feedback, to pursue what we call deliberate practice, which is doing things which just stretch us a little bit further. So if it's a stretch to stand up in front of a group of people, well, actually, deliberate practice is doing it more frequently, and being up for that. And then personal resilience is bouncing back. So if you have a knockback, that actually you step up and do it again. So the first time you stand up in front of a group of people, it doesn't go so well, but you're back, you're there, ready to do it the next time, you're willing to do it the next time. So in terms of preventing derailing, or us as communicators working with leaders to help them to develop this capability and to transition well, this idea of, capability, but also adaptability, learning mindset, personal resilience is important, and recognising that actually there are some fundamental shifts in our personal identity that we might need to make as we progress in our career.
And I think an interesting thing that I hear quite a lot when I'm talking to comms professionals who are trying to sometimes coerce leaders into embracing communications as a part of their role. Time and time again, I hear people saying that they're working with leaders who actually just say, I'm a bit of an introvert, getting onto the stage or communicating is just not my preference, therefore I'm not going to do it. And I suppose it goes back to what Dominic said at the beginning around, thinking that comms is someone else's job. It's definitely something that leaders need to try and embrace, have a learning mindset, and have that bounce back. And I've had that experience when I was working in sort of PR, preparing leaders possibly to go into an interview with Today programme and get a bit of a grilling, and thinking about some of the resilience it takes to be able to put yourself up for further scrutiny if you have a bit of a tough time. So I definitely think that these adaptability factors are well worth considering and well worth being aware of as a communicator trying to work with the leader in this area.
Yeah. Great. So we've kind of covered the content that we wanted to cover, and we're very willing to take on some questions. 1 or 2 questions have come through, which we'll pick up on in a moment. But please feel free if you've got any thoughts or questions that you want to pose to Louise and I. We'll have a few minutes to deal with those. A little bit of further information we just wanted to offer you before we get into that, Louise.
Yeah, so we've obviously given you a little bit of a flavour here of the research we've done into leadership transitions and some of the leader as communicator work that we do. But if you're really interested in finding out more, you can access our white papers. The leadership transitions one is on the Lane 4 website. We've also got lots of thought leadership in the internal comms space. So we've done some research into high performing internal communications, the relationship between engagement and communication, and most recently how to engage hard to reach workforces. So feel free to have a look and see a bit more about those areas. We are also just going to share a little bit more about our Leader as Communicator offering. So we offer a mix of both bespoke sort of tailored programmes, working with organisations to sort of roll that out within the leadership and management population, focusing on some of the areas that are listed on the right hand side around, you know, delivering a compelling vision, effective storytelling, influencing, courageous conversations, and how to have a bit more of an impact in those team meetings. Those are just some of the areas that we focus on, and that can be delivered in anything from a really comprehensive 2-day workshop with lots of really specific content to work on, or a 1-day masterclass, or bite-sized learning sessions for a couple of hours. And that's a blended learning approach, so we accompany that with toolkits and video and so forth. We are also running an event. We are running an event in September for internal comms professionals around being a brilliant business partner. So this is an opportunity for you to explore a little bit more of some of the points I've touched on here around this piece around developing a strategic partnership, building those trusted relationships, and how to be really effective at influencing. Again, all related to this and many other aspects of your role, I'm sure. And finally, before we get into the questions, we would like to ask you to just provide us with a little bit of feedback from today's session. So we're going to be sending you a pulse survey in the next couple of hours that we'd ask you to take 2 minutes of your time to complete, so that we can just take that on board for any future sessions we're running.
Great. So we've got a few minutes to cover questions. There's one that's come through from Ian around using elite athletes as motivational speakers. Can they come across as too polished, and therefore delegates being unable to relate significantly with their own lives and situations, and therefore limiting the impact, or being just a quick buzz rather than having a lasting effect? I think it's a great question, and given our heritage, our high performance heritage, working with elite athletes and helping them to tell their story is one of the things that we like to do and enjoy doing, and indeed spend time helping them to address that very point around whether they come across as sort of superwoman or superman, rather than, you know, what lies beneath, what's the vulnerability that lies beneath that, what are the challenges that they've faced that have helped them to achieve what they've achieved in ways that can be related, that everyone can relate to. Louise, I mean, examples of people who you think have done that really well, and why?
Yeah, well, Greg Searle, who many of you may have seen speaking, I suppose it's obvious to come up with some of our own people as examples, but he has run some stuff around sort of Leader as Communicator, and his experience really is a recipient of communication in various different games that he's competed in. And I think he's really tried to share stories, not just about those sort of gold medal moments, but actually being a bit more revealing about where communication hasn't worked so well, and what's that made that really challenging. So I think it's really important. We definitely try and move away from the sort of inspirational story and glory to actually taking really tangible lessons. And I'm trying to think of a specific aspect of his story where he's done that. I think looking back to that piece around really engaging at an emotional level, like having this vision of winning the medal, and then thinking about the steps that you need to get to, sort of the process goals, if you like, that you need to get to win that medal. I think he does that particularly well. Yeah,
and I think it's a very good point Ian makes about that actually those speakers that are able to connect with the audience, whether they're an athlete or from any walk of life, those are the ones that can really help develop our understanding, and that's sort of why we look for the underlying psychological and emotional messages that come through what speakers say, rather than "Wow, wasn't I great?" So yes, a nice question there. There's another question here around if you notice a leader derailing, what can you do to help?
Yes, so I think that links back to this piece around awareness of adaptability, I guess, because first of all you need to think about whether this leader has a learning mindset and the resilience, I guess, to take some of the feedback, because feedback is going to be the most important thing that you can do at this stage, to sort of hold the mirror up to them and say, do you realise that what you're planning to communicate, or the way that you're planning to communicate, isn't necessarily going to be the most successful, effective way of doing it, and how can you do it differently? So I think that's, as a communicator, where I would be hopefully building on the relationship that I've already got to be able to provide them with some of that feedback and think about, actually, how much autonomy do I have to maybe even take them out of that situation, or encourage them not to do it and have a bit of a rethink around what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you make there about being the trusted advisor is crucial, because we only really accept feedback from those that we trust and or we admire, so or respect. So it's really crucial to have built that relationship, and then, as you say, if the leader is does have that adaptability, learning mindset, resilience, then they're open to that feedback, and you can help them. If they're not, and you get the door shut in your face, well, then I think they really are in danger of derailing. Yeah, nice.
Indeed. Another one that relates to this a little bit. So what if a leader thinks that they're a really great communicator, but in reality they're not?
Yes, I think it's a classic one. I mean, well, we've got to get the camera on them, haven't we? Yes, they've got to have that feedback, and there are a number of different ways that we can give them that feedback. Recording sessions, playing it back, having some formal media training, particularly if they're required to communicate externally, and you'd say more about that probably, Louise. But also getting pulse checks from the audience. What are the followers saying about the leader? So again, if the leader is the person that they should be, then they'll be open to receiving that feedback and will have the drive and determination to want to be better.
Okay, and one more. So have you got an example of when someone's really embraced those water cooler conversations?
Yeah, the informal one. Yeah, that's a nice question. I have actually. I've got an example of the leader of a major power station right up in the north of Scotland, and he was the director of the power station. He was part of senior leadership team, and when we were looking at the leadership communication framework and getting them to think about the ways in which they communicate, he kind of had an aha moment where he realised that he rather than to complain about how the workforce were a bit slow out of the canteen first thing in the morning when the hooter went at kind of 9 o'clock or 8:30 to start the shift, instead of just complaining about people being slow getting out, he would actually go and have breakfast with them instead. So he started to go at 7:30 in the morning, whatever it was, 8 o'clock in the morning. He would go in, pick up a tray, and go and sit and join the conversation instead. Now, I don't know what impact that would have had the first time he walked in, but over a period of time, he kind of saw it as an opportunity to lead rather than something to complain about or to rail against. Yeah.
Excellent. One more that's just popped up. Another one from Ian. Thank you, Ian. What are your thoughts regarding reaching virtual teams in the best way via communication and building heritage relationships amongst these groups?
Nice. Sort of, yeah.
So I think that's a really challenging one. around these sort of virtual teams, because obviously we'd always be a massive advocate of maximising those face-to-face opportunities, but in this day and age it's not always possible to have those when you're working with virtual teams. So I think that the first thing that I would be doing is trying to make sure that great communications doesn't start and end with the leadership team, and actually you think about your middle management population and the impact they're having in the message passing, and that they're having the right impact. But of course there's also maximising the opportunities that come with technology. I think Dominic's got a couple of examples.
So I would echo, particularly with virtual teams, seeking an opportunity when you can bring the team together face to face, and to accelerate relationship building in particular, because there's no question that we do that best if we have that personal contact. So if it is possible to do that, then to find rare opportunities to actually bring people together, but then and then work using the technology that we have these days, having established some norms, if you can do that face to face, and then to work virtually. I think the advent of social media is really interesting. So we ourselves are exploring a number of different ways of using Yammer, both internally and with client groups. For those who enjoy communicating through social media, that's a kind of a new tool that we've got at our disposal, as well as other ways of communicating. A nice way that a guy called Paul Pester, who's the chief executive of TSB Bank. It's a new bank that's come out of Lloyd's as a result of the financial crisis. He sits down in front of his laptop every Monday morning, switches on the camera and records a 3-minute piece, the kind of the situation according to Paul, and he does it in one take. He doesn't edit it, and it just goes ping out to everybody, and everyone can access him speaking for 3 minutes about the state of the business at that moment on a weekly basis. So finding ways to communicate, and of course the more you do it, the better you get at it.
I think there's definitely some merit in what Paul's doing something a little bit more off the cuff, and something that people, even though there's not that two-way piece, which is so important, just being a little bit more accessible, which I'm sure has an impact, and why he keeps on doing it.
Okay, well, I think we probably we've reached our time. 45 minutes has flown by. It's been great to have you on the webinar. We will follow up by asking you for a little bit of feedback, and also by providing links to the documents that we've referred to, the research documents and the various events that we run. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and best of luck with your own leadership communication. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.